All right, hello. This will likely be a very quick one. I just wanted to pop in and do a little explanation of our final project. So I did go ahead and kind of swap our plans for the final project just based on some conversations that I've been having with a few of you. I wanted to lean more into this idea of photography as a visual narrative, storytelling, and concept, rather than what was originally planned, which was introducing Photoshop and doing a more kind of experimental technical assignment. Based on what it sounds like many of you are interested in, it is more of the kind of storytelling aspect. However, if you said, shoot, I really wanted to learn Photoshop, those videos are on my YouTube channel, so everything that I link is typically on the YouTube channel. You can go in and look at those videos. I am still doing that project for the 142 class, so those two videos, composite photography and Photoshop basics for photography, are available as videos if you just wanted that information, if you wanted to know how to do that. But for our final project, again, it's going to be leaning more into a lot of your own artistic inspiration. You'll have a lot of control over this final project, but it will kind of use more of those tools of the visual narrative and visual storytelling. So go ahead and dive in here. I'm going to talk about the assignment first, and then I will show you some examples. All right, so this is, again, the final project. You're going to have 2 weeks to complete this. This is a letter 2. For this project, you may expand on a former project. So if through projects 1, 2, or 3, you really loved a direction that you were headed in, but you wanted to polish or expand that for this project, you can use a former project as the foundation and inspiration for this project. However, I expect that you utilize all the tools, techniques, and concepts that you have learned thus far. From former projects, you have learned via a common thread the concept of images as a set or a visual narrative, that images make sense together and make each other stronger, and that display can be as important as the image itself. From the project Fast and Slow, you learned an advanced understanding of your camera settings and the ability to manipulate those settings to your own artistic style and your own artistic vision. From the project Artist Emulation, you learn the ability to draw inspiration from artists whose work you admire and use that inspiration to expand and strengthen your own ideas. So it's the idea of artistic research, which is just as important as research in any other field. Mastery level technique as a tool to create a unique style and strong concept. So again, this idea of mastering those technical camera mechanisms to contribute to your style and thus to your concept. Okay, so for the process in this project, you will, number 1, make a list of 3 causes you care about. So those could be things like environmentalism, anti-consumerism, body image, etc. So I'll have you go ahead and just, even now, just start brainstorming what are some things that are important to you. Okay, number 2 in that process, you should think about who would benefit most from seeing your perspective on this topic. So if it's something like environmentalism, is the best person to see that going to be a lawmaker? Is the best person to see that going to be some of your peers or consumers of some of these materials or issues that you're bringing up? Who would be most impacted and who could create some change based on seeing your narrative? Number 3, brainstorm how you can create a visual narrative that provides that audience the best peek into your perspective. So you can think about this metaphorically, you can think about this abstractly, you can think about it a little more literally, but remember again that we are visual storytellers. So you're going to hook them emotionally, you're going to craft and build a beautiful story, a really engaging story to draw people into your perspective. So you're using those aesthetic photography tools, the idea of details and portraits and different facets of this story to craft one cohesive message. Number 4, shoot and edit as normal. So that was kind of the part that I really changed. You will not need to download Photoshop for this. We won't be doing any Photoshop tutorials. You will just do this through your regular Lightroom workflow. Review the 4 grading criteria every stage of the project. Okay, so workflow, make sure you've nailed out all of those little technicals. Craftsmanship, make sure you understand how to work your camera. Imagery, that's going to be the aesthetics, the composition, exposures, etc. And concept, particularly important for this one, make sure that you are putting in a high level of thoughtfulness and that you create a concept which provokes an emotional, intellectual, and/or psychological reaction in a viewer. For this to be the most effective story, the most effective letter to somebody, you probably want to hit all of those points. What will be due? 6 to 8 photographs. So if you are doing this project from scratch, you can decide, have I articulated my concept in a simple 6 photographs? Do I need all 8? However, if you are building upon a former project, you are able to use 2 former images. You can take 2 images from a former assignment, but if you do that, you then have to submit 6 original images for this project. Okay, so 6 images minimum. If you are reusing 2 images, building upon them from former projects, you have to have 8 total. All right, contact sheets, that's as normal. I expect you to shoot more than 50 images, but 50 images are the minimum. Please do make sure those have the settings and records like we've been doing. And additionally, I'd like you to write a paragraph in the comment section on Canvas. What is in that paragraph are 2 sentences each. Number 1, describe your conceptual inspiration. So who's your letter to? How did you approach this project? Briefly describe the style of your images. So this is using that vocabulary. And you can just go ahead and talk about the set as a whole. So you can generalize. So this is sort of, my notes to you very often are, this set primarily utilizes central composition. I see strong use of color to create contrast and focal point. Perhaps these images are all slightly underexposed to create a dramatic tone. So that is the kind of vocabulary that I'm looking for here. And again, describe the whole set. You don't need to talk about each individual image, and a couple of sentences is fine. Lastly, describe your own technical strengths and weaknesses. So how do you feel like you did with this project? What was strong and what was weak? Okay, 100 points. And again, you do have 2 weeks to complete this, but if next week you want to check in with me, please do so. There will be no new course content next week, but I am happy to schedule a brief video check-in if you have any remaining questions or concerns. Okay, so that is that. Let me show you some artist examples. All right, so again, this is a letter 2. This is your final project. Because it is your final project, I do expect it to be your best project. All right, so let's see. First one here, Dorothea Lang. So I just went ahead and relabeled these as a letter 2 format. So all of these concepts are concepts that the photographers have discussed themselves. I just put them in the form of a letter 2. And this is to a letter to the government. A quote from Dorothea herself: "Bad as it is, the world is potentially full of good photographs. But to be good, photographs have to be full of the world." Okay, so that kind of hammers home exactly what we're talking about. How do you get people to see your perspective? How do you bring the world as you see it into these photographs and make them not only good photographs technically, but good photographs emotionally? So Dorothea Lang was commissioned by the I believe it's Farmers Security Agency Association. Anyway, they hired a number of artists, namely some famous photographers, to travel around the US and depict life as it was in this time, which was during the Great Depression and post Dust Bowl. So a lot of the Midwestern farmers were moving away from kind of middle America, going west because the Dust Bowl had kind of destroyed their livelihood. So there was a lot of migration happening within the United States at that time, a lot of economic difficulties, a lot of socioeconomic difficulties, and it was just a tough time. So Dorothea went to these often camps, and I use that lightly. It was a lot of people who were transient populations just kind of traveling around looking for work, and often they would find temporary work as farmers. So this is the White Angel bread line in San Francisco. There was, I believe, just a woman who started baking bread for people and passing it out. They dubbed her the White Angel, and so there would often be a line as she was passing out bread in San Francisco. This is Man Beside a Wheelbarrow. So not only is this kind of depicting boots on the ground experience, a really intimate depiction of what was happening to the average person, but also, again, a nice photograph. I would say the tonal range could be expanded a little bit. This was taken at a tough time, high, probably midday sun, really bright, so the background is a little washed out, and the details in the clothing, we're kind of losing some of those to the black point there. So the lighting could have a more full tonal range, but nice composition, kind of weighted towards the bottom of the picture plane. We're kind of adhering to rule of thirds. There's a really clear focal point here. So not only is this poignant emotionally, it is also an aesthetically nice image. And this here is interesting because it's not literally the topic at hand, but metaphorically you can read, this is a symbol of America, right? Ironically, it's called a very blue eagle. This is a black and white photograph. I'll take Dorothea's word that it's a very blue eagle. But this image here is kind of depicting this symbol of America. It's caught up in this barbed wire fence, which is kind of a structure made by man. It's this natural figure. It's met its ending place. It's grotesque and depressing and sad. So all of these metaphorical lines that can be drawn to the topic all around, but this image here is more of a detail shot, more metaphorical, abstract shot, but it strengthens the set as a whole. It still makes sense, but it's breaking away from being incredibly literal. Okay, and this one here, if you have not heard of Dorothea Lange, I'm sure you've seen this image just around. This is Migrant Mother. This is probably Dorothea Lange's most infamous image. This was at a pea farm in California, and this woman, I believe she's 32 or 33, so seemingly it's been a hard life. The worry lines make me think that she's thinking of something with a lot of gravity. It feels like the weight of the world is on her shoulders, though on her shoulders are her children, who are, I don't know if they're crying or distraught or just lounging or trying to escape the heat or the sun or even the camera. I'm not sure, but it does give the tone of hardship, right? And a really intimate, vulnerable peek into this family's life. I do believe that this family was surviving off of the frozen peas that they found on the farm, and also any birds, rodents, things that the kids could capture. So a tough, hard life for this family here. All right, next up, Edward Bertinski. I have had the pleasure of seeing some Bertinskis in real life. They are printed large, I would say 5 by 4 feet, and they are crystal clear, sharp images, highly technical, really vibrant, high saturation colors. So it just feels like you're standing in front of it and you're just being kind of consumed by this landscape. So I wrote a letter to drivers because this particular project was about oil fields, and it was Bertinski kind of driving around to these different areas and seeing the effect on the landscape that the oil had, but then really kind of bringing that full circle to how he was driving to these areas and locations and thinking about, his own part, his own hand, and then started kind of depicting a lot of images about all of us, and how us as individual consumers are feeding into the destruction of this landscape. So this is Alberta oil sands, oil tanker and refineries. I believe this is in Texas. Oil field number 19. So again, depicting a lot of the natural landscape, but then bringing that full circle into us as consumers. So how many gas stations are in this image? This feels pretty relevant. This feels like a scene that I have not only seen, but participated in. This is a landscape that feels familiar to me, but when confronted with all of this stuff all at once across the picture plane with all of these, neon bright signs, it really does feel overwhelming. The amount of stuff there is, overwhelming and sad, and this is contrasting to what is, a natural landscape to some extent, and then the other end of that cycle is something like this that, we participate on. I participate in every week. I go gas up my car. And I didn't show them all, but he also connects this idea of purchasing a vehicle. So this is a VW lot. He also has depicted things like motocross races and drag races on, the salt flats, race car driving, things like that. So this idea that not only are we consuming the oil in our commute and in our everyday, but also in our recreation time, and what does that mean to the overall cycle of this pattern and what it's doing to the land. So again, a letter to the drivers ourselves, so that was pretty clear within all of these connections. It was not a letter to the oil barons or the industry tycoons. It's a letter to us. And I find that pretty poignant. Okay, Carrie Mae Weems. I don't recall if we've talked about Carrie Mae Weems, but we could have because she's one of my favorites. So I decided or declared that this is a letter to the women, and why. I have a quote from her. This woman can stand in for me and for you. She can stand in for the audience. She leads you into history. She's a witness and a guide into circumstances seldom seen. So this series is the kitchen table series. What she did was she set up a camera at the end of her kitchen table. You can see over almost a decade, she would just take photographs of what happened at the kitchen table. And often it was quote unquote women's work. This family lifestyle, these family traditions that happened in the kitchen, which was sort of the hub of the home, right? And there is a little bit of, well, not even a little bit. There's quite a bit of also some racial perspectives here. So she does talk about different identity politics as far as being a Black home and a Black family, although she does specifically say it's not only about that. She wants it to be readable to all women, all households, everyone who has, a hub in the home. It's this window into what we don't necessarily see in everyone else's home. We all have something similar that we can relate to, but we don't necessarily see this in someone else's home. We see what the family allows us to see. So this is a really intimate peek into what the day-to-day life of this family was like. Most of these were not staged, or staged to a very minor extent. But, we can read into this idea of racial politics, the idea of hair. That's kind of a big talking point in Black culture, this idea of natural hair and kind of bringing that back into what is deemed acceptable and professional, and the idea of being judged, the caring of that, the traditions based around that. Also, we have here beauty ideals. So this is generational beauty ideals, whether that's a positive or a negative association, but this idea of beauty standards of mothers and daughters and that relationship, the idea of play and mimicking, continuing these roles. So she did have a very specific formula and what she was focusing the project on, but then from there we as viewers can read it as a story and read all of these little waves that come out and provide a lot of rich context for these images, despite the fact that she did have just a pretty clear impetus for the creation of this series. A simple concept, a simple formula, but really rich in context. All right, and this is the last one I'm going to show you. I do actually see it is almond, like the nut there. I forgot that D, sorry for that typo. And I labeled this a letter to the impatient because what Darren was attempting to do with this was to provide a really slow meditative experience in the making of these images that then translated to a meditative, mindful experience for the audience as well. And I did also want to show this in book form because this was meant to be a book. And I think this goes back to the idea of display. It does make more sense if you think about the importance of display. If you're thinking about flipping through a book, does it make sense to have two images together so that you can look at them at the same time, compare and contrast them? Does it make sense to have one full image printed across multiple pages to get it as large as possible? What if you had one small image and one large image? What does that mean about the hierarchy and the message there? What does it mean if you have 10 images all tiled on the same page and they're very tiny? So I think all of that makes a little bit more sense when we do think about it in terms of a book. And in the Common Thread project, I was talking with a few people, and it did make sense to kind of refer back to this idea of a physical handheld book. You know, that makes display feel tangible. So all of these images were taken on a full moon all around the world, but, you know, he could only take one photo a month, maximum. And it was not every month, so this project took a whole lot of time, really long exposure, so similar to the Sugimoto project that we looked at. Long exposures during the night, no artificial light, just capturing what is there. So this idea that your patience is rewarded with a little bit of beauty, and also this idea that there's some unseen beauty hiding in the darkness. If you are patient and thoughtful enough to seek it out and to wait, you will be rewarded at the end of the day, night. So again, juxtaposing some more literal images, some wide angles with some more abstract kind of details, close-ups. So providing that variation of images, it does tend to create a more interesting storyline, right? If we have one wide angle, one close-up, one detail, one portrait, one, etc., etc. You might recognize this one. This is Horseshoe Bend. And this one is pretty notable. This is probably the most famous one of the set because there's a rainbow, but it's at night. So I don't even know the science behind how that is possible, but it's some sort of reaction with the lens and the amount of moonlight that was hitting that water that created a rainbow, a night rainbow, which is pretty phenomenal. All right, and that is it as far as artist examples. So be thoughtful, take your time, do some brainstorming, make some lists. Hopefully those ideas helped generate, or hopefully those examples helped generate some ideas for you and gave you some indication that you can make this metaphorical and abstract if you'd like. You can also make it a little more literal. Examples of both there, but do not forget that we are photographers first and foremost. So understand your camera and your technicals, make aesthetic images, but also really be focusing on this idea of a really powerful concept. And if you would like, again, to brainstorm, throw some things at me, talk through any ideas that you might have, please just reach out to set up a video call.